Okay, so we're now back in a second video of the podcast style guest talk with Maegan Ciesielski. Still working in progress on the name. Sorry about that. Anyway, so in the first section of the video, we're talking about some of the learning about Maegan's day-to-day work. She has a 3 job, but one of the major one was recreation therapist at Pathway to Housing program. And we were learning about that. And we also talked about her take of the leisure education and how that could actually kind of works, work in action, right? Really how that works in her job as well, which was very insightful. And my next question, I wanted to ask Maegan, what types of, leisure education sometimes addresses this, basically people's barriers and difficulties and constraints related to leisure. And we try to help them, potentially clients with that. So what types of leisure related difficulties do you tend to observe in your clients?
Like probably everyone you can think of. Unfortunately, with our clients, like just the barriers they face in everyday life are so tremendous, which can be really challenging. So I think there's kind of a couple sides to it. The biggest one is poverty. So our clients pretty much all are on AISH. A couple of them are on income support, which is a little bit lower, but even if you're on AISH, you only make $1,600 a month, which when your rent is $800 or $900 a month, and then you still have to buy groceries, and some of our people have cars, or you need to get a bus pass, like you're left with such little disposable income, right, that even something like going to the movies is actually out of your price range. So thankfully in Edmonton, we do have the Leisure Access Pass, which is amazing for getting people to the rec centers and city facilities. So I'm really grateful we have that. But yeah, money is an ongoing struggle. Another big thing is that, so all of our clients have a severe mental illness. And so there's a lot of stigma about that. And so some of our folks just aren't comfortable going out in public or going to public programs, or because they just feel really judged, whether they are or not, that perception is there. Especially when most of our clients also struggle with addiction. A lot of them are Indigenous. So when you compound all those things, they're not necessarily welcome in kind of mainstream leisure spaces. So it's definitely a much different, I'm, middle-class white woman, have a much different experience when I go into something like a spin class at the gym than some of our clients might.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, mental illness is also a barrier in itself. So if you're having a really bad day, or voices and things like going on, it can make leisure very challenging. Yeah, a lot of our folks also have experienced severe childhood trauma. So there's a lot of research into the long-term effects of that on everything from your physical health, and rates of cancer go up to, just how you function in day-to-day life. So yeah, those are all not good things that we have to deal with. And with the childhood trauma piece too, is often that when our folks grew up in impoverished and chaotic environments, like they didn't play on a soccer team, and they didn't go to piano lessons and things like that. So their knowledge of what leisure is often really limited. It might be really like drug and alcohol focused, because this is what they saw adults doing when they were growing up. And so they don't necessarily have those skills, or even like the knowledge that things like that exist out there.
That's a lot of really big, barriers that you're facing. I mean, you and also your clients day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it puts things in a whole different light.
Different perspective. Yes, I can see that. I mean, so many things that we take for granted from, really privileged perspective, myself too, that, that some of the stuff such as, TVs and other leisure resources and knowledge and values are just available to me. That's not necessary. That's something that you cannot assume with your clients.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was really exacerbated with COVID, because so many things switched to this online format.
Right.
But I think like less than 5 of my clients have like a laptop or a computer. And some of them might have a cell phone that has like you know, that's a smartphone capability, but like it's such a small segment that I mean, I think online opportunities are really good. I'm glad they're out there for, you know, most people to engage in things, but just stuff like that's just so out of touch. Or maybe you used to always use the computer at the library. Well, now the library shut down. So things like that, the idea of like kind of internet and technology becoming more of a basic utility now
Right.
is a big thing we've been talking about a lot.
Right. That really puts many of your clients into a very challenging position because of that too, because that's not the assumption that people don't have, for example, smartphone, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of mental health issues, I was just wondering, you know, if you can give us just examples of the type of things that you see actually. I mean, you may or may not know exact quote unquote diagnosis, and also the clients themselves may or may not actually have diagnosis per se, but do you tend to see any patterns across your clients?
Yeah, it's diagnosis is kind of funny. I'm very like anti-medical models, so
Yeah, all right.
and it's also compounded in our clients because we have such high rates of like
Oh,
having
Maegan?
psychosis.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Sorry. No, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I can
am
hear
I
you.
good? Okay. I just say, yeah, there's like some of our clients have psychosis from using meth for 30 years, and some of them have psychosis from a mental illness, and
Right.
the presentation isn't any different.
Right.
A big thing, like a lot of our clients have so much anxiety in social situations, so asking someone to go out in public and do like a fitness class is just like beyond their realm of ability. And lots of our folks are also really, really paranoid. So that comes up in a lot of situations. So it's hard for them to accept help from people because they're so worried that somebody's out to get them that so those can be two of the big ones. And then, you know, if somebody is kind of actively psychotic, they're just not necessarily at a point that they can engage in recreation and leisure. And so our focus then is just more on general life stability. So
right. That makes sense. And it's just the reality of the challenge, right? It's not like clear textbook in a way that it's, hey, here's diagnosis, here's symptom, then this is what it is.
Yeah.
Here's what you do. Not really. Another just a follow up, if I may. You mentioned that a lot of your clients are also coming from, for example, Indigenous background, many other backgrounds that you may not necessarily consider that's like you in a way, maybe. Do you often find it, and I think that can be challenge for professional, and I think that's going to be potentially a challenge for my students in the future too. So when you face such a challenge that, you know, it's really relates to maybe connecting to the clients, how do you go about it in your work?
Yeah, that's definitely something I've become a lot more aware of. And I think it's interesting because most professionals I know look like me, and most people I work with don't look like me. And so I think that the best thing always to do is just to go to that individual and like trying to be person-centered and basing it on what's important to them, what do they want to know about. And if they bring up things like end up doing a lot of work around Indigenous culture, which I'm not Indigenous, but then we have connections in the community. So can I go to an elder or a kukum and talk to them and get their ideas and try to pull on those community resources more? Because something that I've definitely come to learn while I work in this position is that the idea of leisure that I have is like very like, I want to say like Western Canadian middle class kind of leisure, and that's not necessarily the same thing for people from Indigenous cultures. And a lot of people in our program didn't necessarily grow up in traditional Indigenous environments, but they want to reconnect to that, so they don't necessarily know either. So it's really like working with them to like learn about it. So yeah, I think that's where like, yeah, that person-centeredness is just so important, and seeing that person, they're the expert, and if they want to know things, I can be their, you know, research assistant to find out
Mm.
instead of me being the expert and telling them what
Mm.
to do.
I like that expression. I mean, the metaphor of like they being the researcher in a way of their meaningful leisure, maybe what the life that they want, and you being the assistant to it. I think that's a really good the way that students can also picture how it kind of feels like in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, because I do have knowledge about leisure and I have access to lots of resources and stuff. So
Right.
I think I'm very helpful, but I want them to be leading what I'm helping them in.
Right. That makes sense. So the next question kind of relates to what we are just talking about, the challenge part. But overall, I mean, as a professional, we want to, help them or assist them, work with them so that they can, negotiate and overcome some of the challenges that they have in terms of leisure and probably beyond for many of your clients. So when you go about it, when you provide quote unquote service, whatever that work you provide, the time spent with your clients, what's the first thing that you think of? What are the things that you consider most important when you kind of design and approach your clients and helping?
Yeah, I think our kind of goal is always just to like meet the client where they're at that day.
Mm,
Clients in my program, there's no time pressure. They're not going to be discharged after a year or anything like
mm,
that, which is so nice compared to working in like the hospital settings where you're like, oh, you have 6 weeks to make this intervention happen. So sometimes you set up these beautiful plans with people, and then the day of, they're just not in a space to do that, and it can be frustrating. And I think that's okay to like take that moment and be like, I really wanted to do this thing with you today, and then to step back and be like, it's not about me. Like
yeah.
it's about the
Mm,
client, and we're gonna try again next week.
mm,
So um, I think it's planning, it's baby steps, it's being okay when you go back to the drawing board 100 times, and just like being that
mhm,
ongoing support for someone. It's really it's really nice most of the time to know, like, you know what, it didn't happen this week, but we can try again, and
yeah.
that's really good. I think what I spend other time doing is just advocacy in the community. So
Mm.
mostly just bothering people until they give me what I want. So whether that's like with the city to have programs or other inner city agencies, just trying to work together to make leisure as accessible
Right.
as possible, and
Mhm.
pointing out when the city does really stupid things that aren't helpful for people.
Mm,
So
right. So that means that most of the time relates to something like a program availability or the discounts, bursary type of things, or
yeah, like I don't know, like right now to get like your bus pass, if you're on the Leisure Access Ride Transit program, they suggest that you go online and pay with your credit card, which like most people in that program don't have a credit card.
mm,
So, things like that I think people are well intentioned, but when you're not really just like working on those front lines, you don't realize how stupid it actually is. So,
right, right. Especially you're talking about the people who are experiencing poverty by definition.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think I can see that how, I mean, a lot of skills, that the skills to connect, the skills to be patient, the skills to plan and be an expert sometimes, and the skills to, quote unquote, work with other agencies, or, you can bother other people, agencies to get what you want, really, that's also a negotiation skill, right? That's a very important skill too. Yeah. And also I love the fact that you talked about you meet clients where they are on that day, because I feel sometimes, I mean, we want leisure education to be systematic. We want our TR services to be, again, purposeful, systematic, evidence-based, planned, API, and all that, which is great. But I think it really comes down to what you said. It's not about us. It's about them. It's about your client. And if they're not there, your plan is not gonna be meaningful or effective or whatever.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
very
And
real.
yeah, and I mean, just because it doesn't work that day doesn't mean that I can't later. Or maybe you
Mhm.
need a new plan, and yeah, I think sometimes I think in school it's like laid out very like linear,
Yes.
and then when you start working, you're like, none of this is
Not
the
like
same. But it's just like real life is very messy, and that's
where
okay.
where's the
Yeah,
assessment? Where is the planning? That's not what I planned.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
I
it's
like that.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. All right. So actually, this question also, I think what you just talked about, maybe about their, kind of working with the governments and all, I think maybe are kind of a nice segue to the next topic that I had. So what are the challenges in your field to provide leisure education and maybe other quality leisure recreation services in general? So it's not necessarily a challenge for your clients, but it's more for your profession and you as a professional, and maybe for your team to potentially function better, but maybe you do see something that factors out there that kind of limit you, and is there anything that you're working about doing about it?
Yeah, I think that kind of a big challenge that rec therapists face is just a lack of understanding of what we actually do.
Mm,
And I think when people don't understand, then they have like unreasonable expectations, or they think like all you do is run bingo. And like, don't get me wrong, I love bingo. I think it works in certain settings, but
mhm,
that's when you're kind of put into these boxes that
mhm,
it doesn't let you necessarily do like the breadth of what you're actually capable of doing.
mhm,
Um, and so that's like one of the things that I found really frustrating when I worked in acute care was that a big part of rec therapy is like building like a relationship with your client. And
mhm,
like I would get consulted on like a Thursday and the person's being discharged on Monday. And you're like, how am I supposed to do like quality work with this person? But there's just not quite that understanding. They'd be like, can't you just give them pencil crayons? And you're like, well, no. Like, so I think that's something not just in Alberta, but I just know that in Alberta, the rec therapists were really trying hard to become regulated and just like a bit more understood in the profession. Because there is quite this scope of practice if you work in long-term care compared to what I do, compared to acute care. There's these really big differences. But I think when you put leisure at the center of it, of why leisure is important, that kind of holds us all together. So
mhm,
yeah, I think that's one of the challenges. I think some other challenges that are just like a lack of really accessible, really inclusive programs.
mm,
So whether that's accessible physical or socially or
mm,
financially, there's not always a really good fit for that. And then I think sometimes people kind of get stuck in like specialized programming.
right.
And I don't think there's like a problem with specialized programming. Like I work for the Stedward Center, that's a
Mhm,
specialized program, but when that's your only option,
right.
that's kind of what I think the issue can be.
Yeah. So I
So
think I didn't really talk so much about special versus inclusive
mhm.
recreation program for my students. They may have got it somewhere else, like a B class or something like that, but I just wanted to clarify. So, well, actually, I wanted you to actually speak about it, like your views of it, like not just like textbook, but how those things actually work with your clients potentially too, the special versus specialized versus inclusive ones.
Yeah, so like a specialized program, not sure. So the Stedward Center, which is has a range of programs in it, but
Mm,
everybody that accesses it has a disability.
mm,
And so for some people, I think that works really well. They want to go to a gym where they'll see other people that maybe look or act like them, or they know that maybe the staff there is more educated regarding their disability.
mhm,
And that's different than like an inclusive program, which is a program that's offered to the general public, but has somebody like leading it that would know
mm,
how to include someone with a disability. Or maybe when they're advertising the program, it's mentioned that it's like even something like saying it's like for all ability levels. And if they actually
mm,
really mean for all ability levels, that would be something that's
mhm.
really an inclusive program. And
Right.
there's kind of in between ones, like sometimes there's like aquafit at aquafit again
Right.
at the rec centers. So there's uh, different levels of that, and then there's one called Waterworks, which is like for people with chronic conditions, but it's
Mm,
offered in a City of Edmonton program, and they don't ask you if you have a chronic condition before you
mhm,
like register. It's just
right.
guided towards people like that. So
Mhm,
there's multiple levels. I think something like that is really good, that you could go to your local pool but know that the person leading the program is educated enough to make it
mhm,
safe and
mhm.
enjoyable for you.
Wow. So for you, maybe, and then your team really, and then also the profession to an extent too. that really looking out for those things, as in like programs, the good instructors, maybe, or maybe adapted resources or whatever that might be. So those are actually another one important aspect of like what you do and what you look out for, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. I think when there's programs designed for people like with mental illness, I know that when I take my client there and maybe my client's having a bad day, or maybe they're talking to themselves or something like that, I know that it's going to be okay in that setting. Whereas if you went to a program that's just designed for mainstream population, it adds just this other layer of anxiety because you're not sure if your client's going to be accepted. So that can make it harder.
That makes sense. So really having a range of different things, and I think different things have potentially different benefits, and as well as challenges for your clients, depending on the situation.
And I think having that option of choice, like some people really want to go to mainstream programs because they want to be a mainstream person, and that's awesome. And other people really want to hang out with other people that are more, they can connect with, or they, have a similarity to begin with. So allowing them to get to choose that instead of me making that decision for them.
So that kind of going back to the choice and self-determination kind of topic as well. Cool. Well, I think Maegan, we hit really well. It's been almost 1 hour. Thank you for that. And we hit the last topic, and this is the broadest one. And some of the students actually, most of the students want to be, I think, some type of recreation professional, and some of them want to be a recreation therapist specifically, and some of them wants to be a master's student. So just what's your advice? What's going to be you telling your potentially just some giving advice to the aspiring students who want to be professional and all?
I don't know if I'm qualified to do this, but I think really trying to network and be involved is so important. So as I kind of said before, like my first paid job in rec therapy came out of a volunteer position, and then that eventually actually led to being a rec therapist in the same building. So I know you can't really volunteer right now, but one day COVID will be over. So getting out there, and it's a good way to try it out too, because if you're in this volunteer position, you're like, man, I hate this. That's a lot better than that being your career, or you finished a degree in it. And it's, so if you can kind of find out early, you open up some more doors for yourself. I know for rec therapists specifically, there's student membership available through the Alberta Therapeutic Recreation Association. We're always really happy to have students come out. It's not scary at all to come to a chapter meeting. I think everyone's really friendly. There's normally food, which is why I go. So it's just a good way to meet people and kind of find out more about the profession and different things like that. And kind of my last piece on that is, if you are volunteering somewhere or you have your practicum somewhere, and if you have a pretty good relationship with your preceptor or supervisor, it's really nice to just stay connected with them. And I know it feels kind of weird to like email someone randomly every 3 months to be like, just saying hello, here's what I'm doing in my life. But it's so helpful. I know when I worked at the Glenrose, that was where I did my practicum, also at the Stedworth Center. So I've now been employed by both of those places. And I think part of that was because I stayed in touch with my supervisors there. And now being kind of on the other end, if I get an email from one of my volunteers or someone like a student, it's really nice actually. And it is a little awkward, it's a little strange, but overall it's just a nice way to stay connected. And yeah, we can help with seeing if you like the job and then potentially finding jobs in the future.
That sounds great. So that means my students, you can probably email Maegan if you want her.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, put you in a spot there. Sorry.
No problem. I love talking about rec therapy, so I am more than happy to do so.
That's fantastic. I think you're in a very, your team only have one rec therapist, right? So I found that your position being very, very unique as well. The group of people you work with, the situation, the urgency of it, and yet you're kind of out there, not in a hospital, which is again like kind of controlled environment. So that's very different. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think a lot of my students learn about that too. And I totally agree with the importance of networking, volunteering, and all that, which is very difficult now because of the COVID.
Yeah.
But I would appreciate definitely, I really appreciate this opportunity for that actually, because that way hopefully students can learn some of the real stuff from you and other people. So, well, I think, this is the end of our podcast. And Maegan, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Would it be okay if I'm going to ask students comment on the podcast and some of the major takeaway and or maybe thank you notes? And would it be okay if I put them together and then send it to your way in an email?
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. And maybe some of them are interested in, what you do actually. I
Yes.
mean, I bet that they do, but really interested potentially as well. So
Awesome.
sounds great. All right, Maegan, thank you again. I'm going to stop recording now.